I've been asked to speak on Beyond Growth Tourism's regenerative impact. And basically, our industry, our tourism industry, like in so many other small island developing states, is vulnerable on so many different fronts. The myriad impacts of the climate crisis, which I'll go into in a little bit of detail, significant environmental degradation, and biodiversity loss, which affects you because it affects the product that you are using to attract people to come to our country, and also susceptibility to economic shocks. And we saw it a few years ago with what COVID did, how COVID ravaged the tourism industry. And it's good to see from the statement made by the minister, from the address by Madam President, and just from what the PS presented, that we've rebounded very well and that we are bouncing back better. You know, sometimes they talk about bounce back, but we're bouncing forward, and that's really good to see. So the climate crisis really poses an existential threat to small island developing states. In other words, it threatens our very existence. And if we look at what has happened in the last 10 years, you don't have to be a major in mathematics to understand what that graph is saying to you. Every single year of the last 10 years has been one of the hottest years we've ever experienced on this planet. 2016 was the hottest year we had ever experienced. And 2023 came, and it blew 2016 out of the water. You'll see 2023 there. And then 2024 came around last year. And last year exceeded the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we had actually set as the limit for warming. So we're not in a good place. 3 years ago, I gave an address to the Caribbean Association of Banks at the Annual General Meeting, and I said something to them that the president told me still haunts her to this day. I said to them that the summer they experienced that year would probably be the coolest summer they experienced for the rest of their lives. And that is really a reality for all of us. It is getting warmer, it is getting hotter. So as hot as you think it is now, it's going to get worse. So the last 10 years, as I said, have been the hottest ever. And human influence has warmed our climate, has warmed our planet at a rate that is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. That's how far we're going back since we had that type of warming. So when people tell you, oh, this happens all the time, and we've seen this before, no, ladies and gentlemen, we haven't seen this before. And this gives you an indication of what has been happening since 1880. I'll just let you watch this. I won't say anything. Just let you, the blue parts are when it's cool, and as it gets more yellow and more orange and more red, that's when it's getting hot. And you'll see what's been happening to our planet. And that's not taking into account 2023 and 2024, which, as I said, are the two hottest years we've ever experienced. The other thing I want you to take from this is that when you look at what's happening on the North Pole and the South Pole, you'll see that they are warming much faster than the rest of the planet. So that has very serious implications for melting of ice, because we're all islands, we're surrounded by water. As that ice melts, it creates sea level rise, and it puts all of our lives in peril. And a lot of the infrastructure that you have, your hotels, a lot of the tourism developments that the PS spoke about will be happening, are not happening too far away from our coastline. We've spoke about 1.5 degrees as a threshold for small island developing states. If we are to look at where we are right now, from what the countries that agreed to this in Paris in 2015, what they've been doing, we're actually on track for 2.7 degrees Celsius warming, not 1.5. We're going to blow 1.5 out. We're going to blow 2 degrees out. We probably right now are settling at 2.7 degrees Celsius. That will be catastrophic for us. There are places that exist now, there are countries that exist now that will not exist by the end of this century if this continues. So places like Kiribati, Marshall Islands, some of the islands in the Bahamas, some parts of Belize, these will all disappear. These will all be inundated with that type of warming. So what does this mean for us? Well, land and sea temperatures are hotter than they've ever been. So it's not just the temperature on the land, but the temperature on the sea, in the sea, is also quite hot. The impact of sea level rise is being underestimated, and this is something I've been saying for the longest while. Sitting at a computer and trying to simulate what is happening with sea level rise will not work, because there are all sorts of feedback mechanisms. As one thing happens there, it feeds back on something else. It's like your body. If you run a fever for too long, then your organs start shutting down. Your kidney, your heart, your liver, all of them start being impacted. Well, our planet has been running a fever for a long time now. And that is what we are seeing, that all sorts of things are now feeding back on each other. So sea level rise and a lot of the things that we believe will be, oh, just half a meter, it's going to be much worse than that. And we're seeing that already. So rising sea levels, coastal property losses, higher insurance costs, because as you have sea level rise and storm surge, many of your properties, your insurers will tell you, okay, you made a claim last year, I'm going to have to increase your premiums if I'm going to insure you at all. Negative impact on groundwater, particularly for countries like Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis and Barbados that depend on underwater sources for water. As that sea pushes further in, those underwater sources are becoming saline, so it is not possible for them to extract water from some of the sources that they used to before. And reduce soil fertility because the soil is getting more salty. Ocean is getting more acidic, and what does this mean? Well, our coral reefs, people come to the Caribbean and they want to go diving because some tourists believe they'll see Nemo. Can't see Nemo when the coral has died. Weakening of coral reef protective barriers. Our coral reefs play a very important role in breaking that wave action that's coming in. When they start dying, it means that we are much more exposed, much more vulnerable. Reduction in biodiversity. If you're like me, and also food security, I don't eat meat, I only eat fish and seafood. So it means now that my major source of protein is being impacted and imperiled by this, because as the oceans get more acidic, that shell that things like lobster and lurby and all of the others need, I'm using the local terms, use to protect themselves from predators, that can't form anymore. So it means that they become vulnerable and they can't survive. Loss of cultural heritage and identity. We saw those beautiful pictures that the PS showed of the underwater park. That also is something that, yes, those might be the only reefs that we may have very soon, the artificial ones. And decreased investment attractiveness. If your corals now start looking white, people are not going to want to come down to the Caribbean to go diving. Unbearable heat, we're already experiencing it. We're in March. And we're already feeling heat during the day that we used to feel around June, July. That's the reality. So what does that mean? Higher cooling costs. So every single person, every single destination, every single property now has to spend more money on cooling because the heat is just unbearable. You look at what's happening with your electricity prices, they're going up. And they're not just going up during the day, but they're going up at night too because you have to be running ACs at night. Your guests are complaining, I'm sure, that the heat is unbearable. Greater expenditure on electricity, negative impact on workforce productivity, particularly people who have to be working outdoors. I shudder to think of what it's like for construction workers and farm workers working out in that heat. At least I can run inside. They can't. More frequent droughts, more extreme flooding. So what happens is our water cycle is out of whack. So you'll get longer droughts, but when it rains in the deluge. So you can't predict what's happening anymore. This year is a good year because we're getting rain during our dry season. And apparently the prediction is that this will be an unusually wet dry season. But in the past, we've had almost every year being bad drought. And it shows you how unpredictable things are. What does that mean? Negative impacts on agriculture, food insecurity, because a lot of our agriculture is fed by rainfall, and freshwater shortages. Wasco is already experiencing problems, and the dry season has even started. Can you imagine what it's going to be like in April or May? Stronger hurricanes. The oceans are warmer, so there is more energy for the hurricanes to feed off. And last year we saw that. We saw Beryl forming really early, becoming the first Category 4 and Category 5 hurricane to form so early in the Atlantic. The first hurricane to go so far east, and the highest sustained winds prior to August. Then, a year before that, we had Hurricane Otis. Acapulco was preparing for a tropical storm. Otis was supposed to have been a tropical storm. In 12 hours, Otis went from being a tropical storm to a Cat 5 hurricane. So imagine you in Saint Lucia, and you're preparing for a tropical storm. You say, okay, we've dealt with tropical storms before. As long as it's not like Debbie and it drops a lot of rainfall on us, we should be okay. 12 hours later, you're dealing with a Cat 5 hurricane. You can't prepare for that. But that is what's happening because the oceans are so warm, so it is so much easier for these hurricanes to intensify. And this is some of the damage that these hurricanes have caused to us. I mean, Dominica had a double whammy in 3 years. Tropical Storm Erica, damage equivalent to 90% of its GDP, and 2 years later, Hurricane Maria, 226% of its GDP. That was the damage. When Irma hit the BVI, over 300% of the BVI's GDP was wiped out. So can you imagine in the space of 24 hours, you go from being reasonably well, and all of these things we spoke about today, all of the good developments in the tourism industry, I shudder to think, heaven forbid, touch wood, cross your toes, cross your fingers, everything you could do, that one of these things doesn't hit us, and it will throw all of that back. So there's be afraid, be very afraid. Yeah. More intense hurricanes, infrastructure damage, increased cost of insurance, business continuity risk. Last year, Swiss Re showed that there was over $135 billion of payouts in the insurance industry. What do you think that's going to do for premiums this year and the years to come? Increased incidence of pests and diseases. In the middle of the COVID pandemic, when everybody was focused on COVID, 230 medical journals came together in 2021 and declared climate change as the biggest threat to global public health. Imagine that, in the middle of COVID, not some new pandemic to come, climate change. Why? Because you have higher incidence of heat stress. If you are a child, if you're an old person, or if you already have underlying conditions, that heat, and you don't have a fan. In fact, the fan is just blowing hot air, so the fan doesn't help. You don't have air condition, you're struggling. Increase in vector-borne diseases, dengue, chikungunya, chikungunya. Zika. We saw what happened when chikungunya and Zika went for our region, the impact that had on your destinations and people not wanting to come to the Caribbean because they were afraid that they would catch Zika or catch chikungunya. It doesn't matter that where they live, they have to be dealing with all sorts of other things every day, but they don't want to come to the Caribbean because somebody has said to them that you could catch chikungunya and maybe you could get encephalitis from it, so they won't come down. Serious impacts on mental health. Negative impacts on air quality and respiratory health. If you're asthmatic or you have COPD, you have bushfires, you have more Sahara dust, that is not good for you. Diminished attractiveness of the destination. And these are just some of the things that from State of the Caribbean report. I will make a copy of this presentation available, so you don't have to try and remember everything there. But we're talking about an 80% increase in the frequency of Cat 4 and Cat 5 hurricanes over the next 80 years. Over $1.6 billion of replacement costs for tourism resorts associated with a 1 meter sea level rise in the Caribbean. So all of these beautiful hotels that we have dotted along our coast in all of our countries, these are all at risk. And I want to make a plea here. I make it everywhere, and I think it is even more important for me to make it here. If we're talking about sea level rise, and I'll show you a graphic in a while that is a little scary. This is from a study done by UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, looking at the impact of sea level rise on Saint Lucia. All of these blue spots are where there is land right now and where they are projecting will be inundated by 2050. So think of that in the context of the presentation that you had this morning from SLHTA, and whether these things have been factored in. So look at VG Airport, the first one there. It shows the water coming up right up to the runway. Look at Point Seraphin and the Castries Port. You will see what is happening there. Look at Viewfort. Look at what's happening with Euanora. Water coming all the way up to the edge of the runway. And the same thing with Port Viewfort. If we continue on the track that we're on right now, that is what we have to deal with. And I can show you those projections for the entire island, and you will shudder because some of the places where our properties, our prime tourism resorts are right now, are really right in the path of that unrelenting water surge. A warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius will result in a 70 to 90% of warm water corals dying. 70 to 90% of warm water corals at 1.5, what we set as the threshold, 70 to 90% of our corals will die. When we get to 2.6 and 2.7, we're talking about almost entire loss of corals with those temperatures. The world economy is committed to an income contraction of 19% in the next 26 years with a business as usual scenario. If we do nothing, we'll still see income contracting by 19%. Our biodiversity is under threat. The Caribbean and Latin America is a biodiversity hotspot. We have half of the world's tropical forests, 33% of its mammals. Well, all of that is now in peril. And that's already with the Caribbean and Latin America experiencing a 94% decline in monitored wildlife populations over the last 50 years. So these are things happening around us that we're not even aware of. We're going merrily along our way, and that's why regenerative tourism is so important, which I'm coming to. So our biodiversity underpins our economies. That gives you a projection of terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity that will be lost with different warmings, and what that will be with respect to global GDP. Some of the sector-specific risks: tourism and hospitality, coastal erosion, water scarcity, infrastructure damage, negative impact on visitor demand, damage to land and marine ecosystems. Then, of course, there's agriculture and fisheries and manufacturing. $5 trillion of nature-related economic risks will be amplified by climate change. There's also something that they've started tracking called the planetary boundaries. They've looked at which of they've established planetary boundaries for safe safe quality of life for us. And we found that in 2023, we've exceeded 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So climate change, we've exceeded it. Invasive alien species, we've exceeded that boundary. Biochemical flows, so things like nitrogen and phosphorus getting into our water from increased use of pesticides and laundry detergents, etc. That is over the limit. Freshwater change, our ability to get fresh water for our normal daily use, that is under threat. Land system change, biosphere integrity. The only things that we have not yet breached boundaries on are stratospheric ozone depletion, the ozone layer. We did a good job in removing the things that cause the depletion of the ozone layer, so we're safe there. Atmospheric aerosol loading, we're safe there again. And ocean acidification, we're still in the safe zone, but we're approaching the danger zone. And there's this concept called Earth Overshoot Day, and it really looks at if we treated our planet as having a budget, so the resources at our disposal, at what point during the course of the year will we blow that budget? So you've set yourself a budget for a month that you have $5,000 to spend. Hopefully, you will meet that budget, you'll meet that expenditure by the 31st of the month. If you meet it, if you expend it by the 14th of the month, you have a problem. It means that there's 17 days that you don't have money. Well, right now, this is what has been happening. An Earth Overshoot Day this year is on the 24th of July. So if we had to treat our planet as something with a finite budget, we would have spent all of the resources that we can regenerate in 1 year by the 24th of July of this year. So everything we spend after that is stuff that is not being regenerated in the course of the year. And that is happening year after year after year. So really, the status quo is not good enough, which is why regenerative tourism is important, because the tourism industry has long been criticized for its extractive nature. It has a big footprint: greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, coastal and marine impacts, solid waste and wastewater management, land use conflicts, biodiversity stress. When you are talking about regenerative tourism, you're talking about a level that goes beyond sustainable tourism. How can we restore, revitalize, and enhance natural ecosystems? One of the characteristics of regenerative tourism, it gives back more than it takes. So you now have a tourism that is looking to replenish the environment, not take and take and take, which is what we have right now, although from some of the things I've seen, we are making steps in the right direction. It heals the environment. Some of the ministers spoke very much about earlier today. It empowers communities and it promotes resilience. Its principles are local community involvement, environmental restoration, and cultural preservation. Now, in Glasgow, a few years ago, the entire global tourism industry committed to this with the Glasgow Declaration, which is a commitment to a decade of climate action. You've agreed to this already. Internationally, this is something you've agreed to do, to regenerate, to measure, to decarbonize, to collaborate, to ensure that you restore and protect ecosystems, that the tourism sector can support affected and at-risk communities, and you could help visitors and host communities experience better balance with nature. That is actually in that declaration. These are things you've agreed to, that you'll have a just transition to net zero, so the amount of carbon dioxide you're using will be, you won't have an imbalance in the use of the emissions of carbon dioxide. These are all part of your declaration. So it's really a matter now of putting that into action. And these are some of the subtle differences between tourism, sustainable and regenerative tourism. On a philosophical level, while sustainable tourism looks to minimize the negative impact of tourism by using fewer resources, regenerative tourism, which is what you're talking about here today, and the theme of your AGM, is moving beyond sustainability by actively restoring and revitalizing ecosystems. So you want to improve what you have around you, because we recognize what you have around you is sick. It is being depleted. You also want to ensure there's an environmental focus. So you're not just prioritizing conserving natural resources, but you're looking at going further by actively regenerating degraded environments. You are looking at not just supporting local businesses and hiring staff, but something the minister again spoke about, shifting power to local communities so that they own, manage, and benefit from tourism initiatives. That is what regenerative tourism is all about. And that is an economic model that's not based on attracting more tourists while mitigating harm, but it's a model that's looking to redefine how you measure success from just visitor arrivals. Yes, we talk very happily about increased visitor arrivals for cruise and for stayover, but we have to measure success in our tourism industry more than that. And ensuring that your visitors become active participants in restoration. Destination, that you leave the destination better than it was before. And what does it look like for Saint Lucia? Well, eco-friendly infrastructure and operations, green building design, adoption of sustainable energy, I would like to encourage every single one of you who is in this room right now. There is an energy bill that is being debated right now. It has been taken off for more public consultation. Please get involved because it has a very serious impact on your competitiveness. Every single owner of a resort here is spending a lot of money on electricity. We have an opportunity now to determine what that electricity future looks like. How can we ensure that we have greater resilience, better self-generating capacity? Please take an interest in this because I don't think there's anything other than the marketing of Saint Lucia as a destination that will impact your operations as much as the cost of electricity. And it will only continue to go up, as I said, because it's getting hotter. Circular economy, waste reduction, rainwater harvesting. It grieves me as a former minister of responsibility for Wasco that Wasco will take water from a watershed, bring it to a water treatment plant, use electricity to bring it to a water treatment plant, treat it, use electricity to pump it to our homes and our hotels, and we promptly flush that water down the toilet. Make it make sense. Doesn't make sense. So let's do rainwater harvesting so we can have dual plumbing so that rainwater we harvest, we can use it for irrigating our lawns, flushing our toilets, and we use the Wasco water. It will also save you money because guess what? There is no cost to that rainwater. I have 14,000 gallons of rainwater storage at my home right now. So I'm very happy. I'm not spending money, the kind of money I used to spend with Wasco before. If I can do it, you can do it. Ecosystem restoration, coral reef restoration, mangrove conservation, coastal protection. These are all things that we can do here in Saint Lucia. Climate resilient, low carbon tourism, introduction of green transportation options, electric vehicles, bicycle tours, walking tours, nature-based solutions, community-centered tourism development. Again, I was happy with some of the things I've seen the minister speak about. But these are all things that are possible. I'm not talking about things that cost a lot of money. These are possible. Authentic cultural and experiential tourism, investing and promoting immersive cultural and ecological experiences. There are already good examples in our region. It's not like this is not being done. You have in Jamaica, Rock House Hotel, that is doing some really good work. 1/3 of its profits are going back into the community. In Belize, you have Hamanasi Adventure and Dive Resort that is doing a lot of work in rehabilitating flora and fauna. And here in St. Lucia, Jade Mountain. Particularly what Jade is doing. I think Carolyn is blushing, but she has every reason to blush because they've been doing some awesome work with water. Jade does not take any water from Wasco. Am I correct, Carolyn? No water from Wasco. They have rehabilitated the Asmame watershed. That provides all the water. And I've also been told by both Carolyn and by Carl that in the event of a crisis, they can supply the community of Soufriere with water from that watershed. That is what regenerative tourism is all about. So, how do we make this happen? First of all, the government has a very important role. It has to take steps to climate-proof the tourism industry, but you also have to do it. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how much I can stress that. Stop building hotels on the beach. You are only putting your very important and very expensive investment in peril when you do that. It might look good, it might feel good for the average visitor to come out of their room and curl their toes in the sand, but these will become very soon over-the-water suites if you do not pay attention to this. Okay? I'm being trivial about it, but that is what we will be confronted with. So please, let's stop putting hotels in harm's way. Climate-proof the tourism industry. Integrate regenerative principles in tourism development plans. Incentivize green, regenerative tourism investments, and these are all things for the government to do. Private sector, your role, use your market advantage. Saint Lucia, it's not a stretch for Saint Lucia to promote itself as a green destination. We are not a concrete jungle. We are a country that we say, let it inspire you. What's inspiring? Our pitons, our marine scape, our sulfur springs. So let's protect that and let's use that to our advantage. We are the Helen of the West Indies. We're the most beautiful island in the West Indies. Let's use that. Let's collaborate to establish industry-wide regenerative goals. Let's not let other people tell us what we should be doing, so then they impose things that we cannot now meet. We now should determine between SLTA, SLHTA, and others, what does green tourism, what does regenerative tourism look like? That is our standard, that's a Caribbean standard, and let the others come and match up to it. Don't let us have to always be meeting somebody else's standard. Regional cooperation. Explore opportunities for regional collaboration on sustainable tourism development. Let's do this as a region. There's a tourism ministers meeting taking place right now with the OECS. Let's have these items on the agenda. I know that there's a big elephant in the room by the name of DJT, and that he is doing things that are disrupting. But okay, we can deal with DJT, but we also have to put our own, Donald J. Trump, that's what I'm talking about. We can always, we can put our own house in order. I didn't want to mention the man's name, you forced me to. Advocate for climate finance to support the transition of tourism industries in SIDS. Develop partnerships with conservation groups, NGOs, multilateral agencies to consolidate, promote what regenerative tourism looks like for us. We can make, ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced, we can make Saint Lucia a global leader in regenerative tourism. That can be our legacy. That can be something that we give to the world, leadership in regenerative tourism. Everyone has a part to play. Government, private sector, tourists, local communities, we all have a role to play. This has to be done together. When we say Saint Lucia, let her inspire you to renew and restore nature and renew communities, to turn visitors and caretakers into caretakers and landscapes into legacies. Let's reimagine tourism and turn it into a force for regeneration. Let's make our tourism industry a force for good, not just for economic growth, but for environmental and societal regeneration. And before I end, please use the information that you are mining. That information, data is big now. This morning I went on, I'm a bit of a tech nerd, so I went on to try and link some cameras that I put up, wireless cameras with my Alexa app. And then Amazon is now asking me, so I did something, and it's asking me, okay, about my vehicle, what vehicle would I like to link to the Alexa app? Do I want to link my RAV4 or my Camry or my X5 or my Santa Fe? Now, these are all vehicles I've owned in the past. But hold on, how you know that? How they know that is because I've been shopping for items for these vehicles on Amazon. So it's mined that information, put it there, and it's made the link, and it's asked me, okay, do you want, it doesn't know that I've sold all of these vehicles except the RAV4, but it knows that I have these vehicles, I've bought them, so it's asking me, do you want to link those vehicles? The same way we are collecting a lot of data on the tourism industry that can give us insights into what visitors want, where visitors make the connection. Let's not have somebody else use that data and then charge us for it. You have the head of the Saint Lucia Tourism Authority. He is one of the premier statisticians in the region. Louis Lewis is. So we can set that, I mean, he's graduated to do other things since then, but he started off as a statistician. We can use that information to give us insights into our industry, and we can now put ourselves at the cutting edge so that we can really position Saint Lucia as a global leader in regenerative tourism, and we can make those connections and see what we can do. Ladies and gentlemen, I spoke longer than I intended to, but thank you very much.